Hi, I'm Ron Turner. Welcome back to the Constitution in a Nutshell. Well, this is our last session together. It's gone mighty fast, I think. What I want to do today is revisit a topic that we've touched on before that you hear a whole lot about in the news, the Electoral College. And then I want to talk about how did they do it in 4 months? How did the people who were at the Constitutional Convention in the summer of 1787 come up with a whole new Constitution that we've looked at in some detail in just 4 months? And then I'm going to wrap up with some closing comments. To talk about the Electoral College, we need to look back at Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution. Each state shall appoint electors equal to the number of senators and representatives that that state has. Let's use Tennessee as an example. Like every other state, regardless of population, Tennessee has 2 senators. We also have 11 representatives in the House of Representatives. The larger states have many more than that, and the small states have as few as 1 representative. But we have 11, so 2 plus 11 gives us 13 electoral votes. So when the electors are chosen, we choose 13 people, 1 person with each vote, to meet in what they call the college. It's not a college, it's just a group of people. Okay, let's take a hypothetical. In an election in Tennessee, candidate A, let's just assume, receives 100 popular votes. That means from the whole population, everybody who votes on election day or early voting, the candidate A gets all 100 votes. Candidate B gets 0 votes on election day. So how many electoral votes or electoral college votes does candidate A get? 13, because he or she got all of the popular votes. And candidate B gets 0 electoral votes. Hang with me on this. This is going to get a little interesting. Okay, that's pretty obvious right there. Let's assume an election where candidate A gets 51 popular votes and candidate B gets 49. Well, who's the winner? Candidate A is the winner, but candidate A, if you allocated them based on this percentages, would get 7 electoral votes, and candidate B would get 6. That looks fair, doesn't it? That's the way you would normally think that it would happen. Let me show you what happens in reality. Here we have that election under Tennessee law, the winner takes all. So if the candidate A gets 51 votes, that's 100% of 13. The candidate A gets 13 electoral votes. If candidate B gets 49 popular votes, candidate B gets 0. Is that fair to candidate B? I don't think anybody would say it's fair, but that's what state law requires. As a matter of fact, that's the law in 48 states out of the 50 states. It's a winner-take-all election. So under the Electoral College, the federal law gives the number of electoral votes to Tennessee, that's 13, but Tennessee's law, state law, decides how those votes will be allocated. And under state statute in Tennessee, which is perfectly legal and perfectly constitutional, the winner takes all. Well, this is how we have states that are so close, and it's how a candidate can overall get a minority of the popular vote and still be elected president because they get enough electoral college votes in the winner-take-all states. So what's the solution? Well, the unfairness of it, to me, is pretty clear. You could argue that it's not unfair. If you believe in the majority wins, this is clearly not a majority wins situation. I am not going to go into the details of why this was put in the Constitution. There are some legitimate reasons, or there were at the time the Constitution was drafted. It was to protect the smaller states. And the states' rights were very, very important in 1787. They still are. I don't mean to minimize them, but the Electoral College is the result of that. The same as having 2 senators in every state, regardless of population. So what's the solution to this discrepancy, this unfair aspect of this? One is to amend the Constitution. Well, we know how difficult that would be. We've had 27 out of 10,000 over 240 years. So that's probably not a viable way to go. Another way to deal with this would be to change the law in 50 states. Well, that's also not very likely. To get all 50 states to agree to change their law to do away with winner-take-all is pretty unlikely. A third possibility as a way to deal with this is to change the law in states with 270 electoral votes. Now, hang with me on this. There are a total of 538 electoral votes. Any candidate who gets 270 of those votes, which is a majority of 538, is elected president. So if the states that total 270 electoral votes, and it could be any combination of states, if those states come up with 270 electoral votes and they all agree not to use winner-take-all, that solves the problem. It leaves the Electoral College in place without an amendment. Believe it or not, there is a law that's been proposed and it's been circulated and already signed by the legislatures in states totaling 205 electoral votes. And what they've said is that once enough states sign this law to have a total of 270 electoral votes have signed it, it becomes law. And it's in the process now. They're working on it. Whether it's going to pass, who knows?
We recognize this is somewhat confusing, so here it is in a nutshell. The National Popular Vote Compact says that instead of giving all of a state's electoral votes to the candidate who won that state, the states would give their electoral votes to whichever candidate wins the most votes across the entire country. So let's say candidate A wins the popular vote nationally by getting 60 million votes, and candidate B gets 55 million votes. Under this compact, all of the electoral votes from the states that have joined would go to candidate A, since they won the most votes overall. The compact wouldn't take effect until enough states have joined to reach 270 electoral votes, which is the number needed to win the presidency. Right now, states totaling 205 electoral votes have already agreed to the compact. Once states representing 270 electoral votes or more have officially joined, then the candidate who wins the national popular vote would automatically become the president, since they would be guaranteed at least 270 electoral votes from the compact states.
And I know this is a lot to take in at one time. If you would like more information on this one, just put in National Popular Vote Law in your search engine and you'll get some good information on it. Let's move on. How did they do it in 4 months? The Constitutional Convention almost fell apart several times over some key issues. A couple of them were very, very emotional as well as difficult. George Washington and Benjamin Franklin were two people that held the convention together. Washington had been the commander-in-chief of the Army during the Revolutionary War, and was the most well-known and popular person, not only in America, but he had gained a reputation worldwide. And he came in, he was not sure he even wanted to attend this meeting in 1787, but he was convinced to come, that they needed his stature and his presence. And he was actually elected president of the convention. He was the chairman. He didn't talk much, but he certainly kept the meeting going. Benjamin Franklin, as I've said, was the oldest delegate, well known worldwide as not only a statesman, but as a scientist. So the presence of those two people was one key to coming up with a new Constitution in just 4 months. Here were the three big issues. Slavery. Slavery was a huge issue. By 1787, slavery was widespread, mostly in the South, but in other parts of the colonies. It was a big part of the economy in the South. The third big issue was power, the big states versus the small states. Under the Articles of Confederation, the small states had about as much protection as they could have because they had an equal vote with all the big states, and by big and small, I'm talking about population. And the third issue was rights. Individual rights of individual citizens primarily. Those three issues had to be dealt with in one way or another in order for these 56 delegates to get together and approve the Constitution. So what did they do? Well, they punted on slavery. That was probably the most divisive and emotional issue. And they finally realized that they were not going to reach an agreement on it. Are we going to accept slavery? Are we going to make it illegal? There were people who felt strongly on both sides of that issue. So they punted. I'm using a sports metaphor here, but what they decided to do was to put it off for 20 years. We've seen the provision in the Constitution that said Congress will not make slavery illegal until at least the year 1808. There were many people who thought that slavery would just die out as an institution on its own within that 20-year period. But the delegates agreed to disagree. With regard to power, they compromised. The first compromise is what we call the Great Compromise. That was where they finally got together and said, okay, we're not going to have a Congress with one house in it or one chamber in it the way we had under the Articles of Confederation. We'll have two. One chamber will have equal votes, just like under the Articles of Confederation. Instead of one vote for each state, they'll have two votes, but that's the Senate. And another chamber in Congress will be based on population. The larger states will have more representatives than the smaller states. It's a classic compromise. Instead of one house, they have two, one based on allocating representation by population, and the other one by each state having the same number. That's two. Okay. The second way they shared power is very interesting. And I haven't used this word before, but under the Articles of Confederation, the states had all of the power. Under the Constitution that they've prepared, the federal government has some power, but that power was also limited. They shared power between the state government and the federal government, and that's what we call federalism. Sharing power between the states and the federal government is called federalism. Now, we've all grown up with it. If you were born in the United States and have grown up here, you just accept the fact that the state you live in has the certain jurisdiction over some things, and the federal government has jurisdiction over others. Try explaining that to someone who has just moved to the United States. Okay. One example, if you want to get a divorce, you go to state court. If you want to file bankruptcy, you go to federal court. Why? Because the states retained jurisdiction over marriages, and the federal government retained jurisdiction over bankruptcy. Now, obviously, that question gets very, very messy when you get into individual rights and personal liberty and that type of thing. Those are some of the issues that we have not discussed in this class. We'll hold those for another day. But they were able to compromise. That's the point on the question of power. What did they do with the question of rights, individual rights? Well, they trusted one another. There were some delegates at the convention who almost didn't vote for the Constitution because it really doesn't deal with individual rights. There's nothing in the basic Constitution about freedom of speech or religion or the press or anything else. Well, other delegates said, let's go ahead and vote for the Constitution as it is, even without that, and we promise that as soon as it's ratified, we'll submit a Bill of Rights as the first amendments to that Constitution, and we'll do everything we can to get them passed. And the other delegates trusted them, and it happened. So what can we learn from them? How were they able to accomplish what they did in just 4 months? They knew when they had to punt, they compromised when they had to, and they trusted one another. Now, you know the definition of a compromise. That's where both sides are a little happy and a lot unhappy. But you have to be willing to do that in order to compromise. I think we can learn from them. We can learn a lot from them. These 3 lessons from 1787 are very difficult to apply to the society we live in today, particularly when you're dealing with the emotional issues that we have not discussed, because the Constitution directly impacts abortion, gay rights, gun control, religious exercise, okay? Can we, the voters, learn to either compromise on some of these issues or punt and put them off, or to trust one another? I don't know. I'll be really honest with you. I don't know. Likewise, Congress itself needs to learn to do some of this. The more we all dig in our heels and stand by our own positions, the less likely it is that we're going to be able to do any of these things. Well, the convention in 1787 almost fell apart over their emotional issues, slavery as an example, and they were able to get through it. Okay, as a concluding comments, I want to just say a few things. First of all, thank you for being with me for these 5 sessions. You now know more about the Constitution than 90% of Americans. I know that's hard for you to believe, but trust me, if you've taken in everything that we've covered, you clearly know more than 90% of your fellow Americans. We know that from surveys that we talked about earlier in the series. And it does make a difference. People still say, well, what difference does it make if whether you know about the Electoral College and the 3 branches of government and sharing power? I'll repeat what I've said earlier. If you don't know your rights, you won't be able to tell when someone is trying to take them away, particularly some fast-talking, slick politician who looks and sounds so sincere. The more they sound that way, and the more they're telling you just what you want to hear, the more you want to be careful. I encourage you to share what you've learned in this course. It does make a difference. And I want to thank you again for joining me. I would appreciate feedback from you, positive or negative. Use the comments section below to let me know what you think. And don't forget to hit that like thumb also at the same time. Subscribe to my channel if you enjoy these videos and would like to see more of them. Subscribe to my channel and share it with friends of yours who also might need to know a little bit more about the Constitution. I appreciate you being here. Take care.